Welcome back, everyone, to the Gather Poets podcast. Once again, I always say this, but I have a very special guest with me today. We have a treasured Gather member, a talented poet, Sukriti Patny. Welcome. How are you feeling? I know it's not morning for you, it's morning for me. What time is it where you are, and what are the vibes? How are you feeling?
It's 6:30 in India in the evening, and
Ooh.
I'm so excited to be here with you, Maria. Thank you for having me. And I'm just like still pinching myself from the time I got your email to now, because I don't know how it is that I've ended up on this podcast, but here I am.
Aw, we're so happy you're here. So, so happy. Writing with you for the last few, I guess, months it's been now has been really a joy and a treasure. And I know I said treasure already again, but some things are worth repeating. And I like that word. So I'm going to repeat that word. um, yeah, just like super exciting to read your work and excited to publish your work now in the Lit Mag as well. Um, do you want to kind of give us a background maybe on how you started writing and what your poetry style is today and maybe how that evolved throughout the years?
Sure. So I think I was someone that always wrote. Like from the time I was 7, 8 as a kid, it's just something that organically kind of happened for me. And but I always kind of kept it separate from what I wanted to do in life. I was like, okay, I'm going to grow up and get an MBA and become an entrepreneur, and I did all of that. So my journey to writing has been like really winding in that sense. I did B school. I did a corporate career in marketing, set up of an entrepreneurship with handcrafted products, and cut to COVID and like the pandemic and sitting at home and a real reckoning in terms of where am I going with my life and what do I want from it. And that kind of really led me back to writing, and something that I had kept personal and to myself became something I really wanted to pursue more long term. That's kind of how I came back to writing in a way. It was something that was personal for me, and in a way for me to deal with, process my feelings, and something for me to heal with. And it's turned into something more.
Mm.
My writing, like with poetry especially, I feel like I'm still. I write a lot of confessional poetry,
Mhm.
and it's a lot rooted in healing and in grief and in the issues that I face. I and I think my poetry style tends to be too honest.
Mm.
um, and that's something that I think now with Gather that I'm trying to move away from. Like I'm really trying to learn how to play with my poetry now.
Yeah, it's like that evolution, right? I feel the same way. I went through very similar journey of like my poetry starting out as a mechanism for healing, a mechanism for processing. And I think it's like that's such a beautiful season of life to be in as a writer. Because for me at that time, like you said, my writing was very private. I didn't really share it with anyone. And I think as writers, we evolve, right? And so maybe that's where we began, and we can come back to that. There's nothing wrong with coming back to that. But then we get to a point where what's next is the evolution of the craft of our writing, and we learn how to break the line. We like I think sometimes in that innate sort of honeymoon phase, I mean, I sure as heck didn't even really understand what line breaks were. I was just writing because that's what I felt like doing. It was the natural, organic thing to do, and it really works. It's a phenomenal outlet. And then, you move on in life and maybe the processing has happened. And then you feel maybe your nervous system feels safe to then start exploring how to dig into your poems in a way that might originally have felt unsafe for me anyways. I think when you're writing about something that is so personal and needs to be processed, I think coming at it from a craft perspective is not always the right thing because I think we might shut down. I don't know, did you feel that way too, in the early stages of, like, reconnecting with your writing?
Yeah, I think in the early stages, I think I would say I was writing for myself.
Hmm,
And I was not writing for it to go anywhere or for anyone else to read it.
yeah.
And so it was more about what can I get on the page and
Mhm,
why do I need to get it on the page and why do I need to get it out of me.
mhm,
So exactly like you said, I don't think I was paying that much attention to the craft of writing.
Mm,
But it's I also somewhere believe that perhaps there is X amount of writing that you need to get out of you
mm,
before you can tap into other places of, of joy or of hunger, or maybe
mm,
there's just X amount of like writing that you need to get through before you can really play with it.
mm,
So it's yeah, and like joining Gather, I think for me was one of the things that's really helped, because you're not always writing. It's about where the prompt takes you, and it's you're getting inspired by other people and the kind of things they're writing, and you're
mhm,
learning. So you write about things you wouldn't ordinarily have written about, and it's not just what you're going through or what you felt. So you're able to experiment a little more. Um, and I think especially like even with forms, like I used to be somebody that tended towards writing a prose poem very often, but
mhm,
to kind of play with different forms and say, okay, what can I do? Can I write a really short poem, or can I write a poem that kind of just takes up the entire page, but like there's still space to breathe in it?
mm.
um it has been a lot of
Yeah, it's like we tap into that sort of play aspect of poetry and what can we like play around with on the page. And I think writing with other people too, like just seeing other people's poetry and what they do with it is one of the most liberating things in poetry, because even when you go on like the Poetry Foundation's website or the poets.org, and you notice like all of these kinds of poems are being published and they're all so vastly different, and we have some poems with beautiful gorgeous amounts of white space, and then we have also some like traditional sonnets that are still being published, and it's kind of like liberating to know that um like objectively speaking they're all very different and unique, but they're finding a home and they're finding a place, and it kind of just gives you permission as well to try new things and to experiment. And I remember for a long time, I didn't really use any white space in my poetry because I thought it looked amateur. And then I was like, I started reading other poets that have published beautiful, like sprawling white space poems. And I was like, oh, yeah, like I can do that. Because that's what I originally tended towards before I read poetry really widely, was I would use lots of unique white space, never really understanding what it was for. And I think it's cool to look back now and be like, oh, that was my inclination, but with a little bit more knowledge on how to use it purposefully and with intention. Now it's one of my favorite things to do in poetry. I think it gives so much like breath to a poem. And there's like something about a poem, like you said, taking up space on a page that is so wonderful. And I think my poems really need that, but I feel like sometimes I needed that permission to see other poets doing it to feel like, okay, like I can do this too. And what that's one of the aspects of a community that I think is really helpful, is you're constantly being exposed to other people's different kinds of writing. Um, who were
True.
your poets that you kind of like look to, Sue, when you were starting your journey, and or poets that have really inspired you?
I think like Mary Oliver's got to be at the top of that list. I think every poem of hers has like made me just like put down the book and just cry, or like just step outside. And Yeah, like her stuff is just touches my heart. She's really changed the way I also look at the world, and the importance of really paying attention to the smallest of things, and
Mhm.
how that's so necessary today. Because like if you look at our lives and how much of it is in front of a screen,
Mm,
and we're constantly scrolling, right? So your eyes are constantly moving, and you're just moving so fast. Like how often are we just sitting in one spot and observing the tiniest of
mhm,
details? And like if you look at like the features that come up on social media now, like you can play an Instagram reel at 2x speed, because
mm,
nobody wants to wait. Nobody wants to wait and sit with it and see what emerges. And it's also changing the way we live our lives. We're constantly in such a rush.
mhm,
So I think her poetry and her writing and approach to life has influenced me so much, in terms of just stay and like look. Like, have you looked at every single detail that there is to see? If it might be the same tree that's outside your window every single day, but there will be something different about it every single day, without a doubt. So I think she's at the top of my list for everything, for when I need a hug, when I need to feel anything, it's her that I go to.
Mm.
And the other thing is, I think for me, my poetry has also been influenced so much by the practice of yoga.
Oh.
Um, yeah, because it's the lessons that I kind of learn on the mat are also to do with staying and with taking up space. And the minute you're kind of learning how to take up space on a mat, you also learn how to take up space in a room. Can you
Mm.
walk into a room and be okay? Can your words on a page take up space and be okay? And when you stay in a pose, and it's a stretch and it might be a little uncomfortable, but if you stay and if you just breathe through it, it's going to get a little more comfortable. It's the same thing, I think, like for me with a poem. You write a poem, maybe it's not okay, stay with it, and
Mhm.
it'll kind of get there. If you're processing something and you want to write about it, stay with that feeling till you can really name it. Sometimes, like, you might think you're coming from a place of fear, but if you really sit with that feeling and really explore it and observe it,
Mm.
maybe you're coming from a place of ego and it's not fear. So can you really name what's happening inside you, or can you really name what's everything that's happening around you? So just in terms of observing, um, that's something that both yoga and like Mary Oliver have kind of really reinforced for me.
Mm. I'm just like soaking that all in, Sue. I think that's such great wisdom for poets. It's like your poetry is informed by other aspects of your life. Your poetry is informed by the practices you have outside of the page, like yoga, meditation, how you connect to your body, I think is a really big one. That's sort of a journey that I'm going on with right now. I feel like I'm in a season where I think I mentioned this on another podcast, but I'm in a season where I'm intellectualizing my life. I'm thinking about my life. I'm organizing my life. I have all these plans and everything is up here. And I'm finding it hard to access my body when I write. I'm finding it hard to like slip into not a thinking, but like more of a knowing or like a almost just like embodying the poems instead of thinking the poems. And one of the things that has been really helping is yoga. I've joined a new studio and I'm really connecting with the yoga instructor, and it's been interesting to see how my poetry has changed even just in the last, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks. I feel like I'm starting to slip back into like a poetry from the belly instead of a poetry from the mind. Um, and I think sometimes we can run the risk of over intellectualizing our poems as well, like wanting our poem to be perfect theoretically, but it's not really coming from a place that's like deep within us and a almost like a truth. And I definitely feel like I've fallen into that in the last few months, and I'm excited because I feel like I'm coming out of it, and it's such a good feeling. But I love what you were saying about the idea of sitting with something until you can name it. And there's like this dignity that comes out when you can stay with someone long. Like think about it, when you're meeting someone new, what's the most beautiful thing you can do? Remember their name, right? And things, feelings and our inside of us want to be named correctly as well, I think. And when we are patient with them long enough for them to not be shy and for them to show themselves, then there's like we're giving our feelings and emotions the dignity of like naming them correctly and remembering them and then writing about them. Wow. I want to just like talk about this forever, Sue. I think this is such a good topic.
Yeah, and I also feel like, if you're struggling with something and you're not giving it the time to identify it, it's gonna show up in your work, and it's gonna show up again and again and again till you're accepting of it.
Mm,
Because I think that's what life is, right? Like if you're trying to run away from something or not sit with it, it's gonna come back at you, and in every turn of your life.
mm,
I think for me, one of the things that, like, when I was starting out on my poetry journey, one of the things I really struggled with was a lot of my poems were about grief, or about the body and how feelings present themselves in the body. And when I started applying to submitting to litmags, a lot
Mhm.
of the poems that got accepted were all about grief and about the body. And like I remember having a conversation with my husband, and he's really supportive. Um, that all of my poems are like all these poems about the body and like about the uterus, and he just heard me out. And then 10 minutes later, I came to this realization. I was like, okay, like I'll be the body poet. I'll be that uterus poet. It's okay if these
Mhm.
are the only poems that are getting published. Why am I trying to run away from this identity and be upset about it?
Mhm.
And just coming to terms with that and accepting that and saying it's okay if at the end of the day, if people are going to be like, oh, that's the body poet, or that's the uterus poet, that's not a label I should try and run away from.
Mhm.
And so much unlocked for me when I did that, that I have been able to write about other things, and I have like poems coming out that are about other things. So maybe I just needed to accept that to move on
Mm.
and not be
Mm.
scared of it anymore.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, tingles. I have like tingles right now. I think you're like so right. And perhaps there was something in you. Those poems needed to be accepted. And until you accepted them, they were going to keep coming up. It's like the string of life, right? It just keeps coming back, keeps coming back. I also think we go through seasons, right? Like perhaps this is your 5 years or your decade of writing about your body for the majority, and then maybe in the next decade you'll write about something else. And
Yeah,
I think we sometimes condense our timelines to such minute and finite scales that like if we write only about one thing for a year we think wow we're positively effed, but like in reality we have the rest of our lives. So realistically if you spend 10 years writing about one thing you still have plenty of other decades to explore and move through
yeah,
other things.
absolutely. I think like my journey to poetry also was so winding because I went to like the opposite world of, because I did like an MBA and I was working in a corporate environment, which was like the hustle and like 12-hour work days and insane kind of life. Um, and to come back from being like this type A super competitive person into a life that's a little more about sitting and trying to figure out what's going on and what you want to write about,
Mhm.
has been such a journey. And I think somewhere it kind of tells me that if the path kind of moves away from where you wanted to go, have the faith that it'll come back. And maybe there was just something along the way that you needed to see, and which is
Mm,
why you went into all of those other things before you kind of came back to writing. So yeah.
mm. What do you think it was for you that you needed to see when you were working in your corporate career?
I think now that I really think about it, I'm such an overthinker that if I had pursued writing from the get go, there would have always been a what if.
Mm,
And so I've seen all my what ifs. I've seen what it meant to have like a corporate job, and I've seen what it meant to start a business. And I think the most important thing that I learned was how to deal with failure.
mm,
And once, like I set up a business, and it was a small business, and we worked with like handcrafted ceramics and wooden items, and it was all made in India. But it was like a baby startup, and eventually it didn't do well.
mm,
And so you learn so much. Once you fail, you're no longer scared of it.
mm. Yeah.
You're, yeah, so like at this point, like I'm not scared of getting rejected by a litmag, or I'm not scared of not winning like a competition, or I'm not scared of never having a book deal, because you've sat with failure. You know what it feels like. You know that something is going to work out tomorrow. Maybe it just, all of that gave me a thicker skin,
Mm, yeah.
because
That's so interesting. The reason I ask is just because I'm trying to think, like because I had, kind of a similar story to you. I didn't start my own business, but I was an accountant, so I worked in the corporate space before I started writing full time and before I started Gather, and I wonder even if, like, part of the reason why I had to go through that before I started doing what I love was maybe less about, like, the hard skills, but more about the soft skills of, like, showing up for myself every day. Like, going from working for someone and then to becoming self-employed is, like, a whole other beast. It's truly, I think, a spiritual experience for most people to all of a sudden have to work for themselves, but I think part of like, my job at the time was like, I had to be very diligent and I had to manage my time well, and so those sort of soft skills, I think, definitely still apply, like, in my writing journey, and yeah, failure, like, messing things up, not meeting deadlines, you're right, once you have gone through that already, then it seems like, well, the worst that can happen is it happens again, and I survived it once, so I will survive it again, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Really interesting, Sue.
absolutely.
Um, what do you feel like you changed as a person when you started writing? Or, like, um, in what ways do you still see yourself as the same Sue that was working in entrepreneurship versus Sue the poet now? I'm always curious, I always ask the question too, or I don't always ask the question, but I often ask the question to my friends and to Corey. We often talk about this. I'm curious if you think people fundamentally change or if we're changed by our creative practices. Um, yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, I think I've definitely learned how to be more patient
Mm,
because of my creative journey. Because that's not something you can rush and force, right? But
mm,
and I've learned to be a little more gentle with myself. The work me is used to be very very harsh on myself in terms of meeting deadlines or in terms of if a project did we achieve the best that we absolutely could have, and if we didn't, there was no room for forgiveness.
mm,
But I think with poetry, and because somehow, at least for me, I feel like I'm always I don't think a poem's ever done. I'm always editing it, and
mhm,
even after it gets published, sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I could go back in time and change this, because that would make a better title or that would make a better line break. So you kind of learn to just be a little more gentle with your past
mm,
and say it's okay because the you 3 days ago didn't think of this line break.
mhm,
Um, but somehow I couldn't do that at work. If a project was even like delayed or didn't do as well as I wanted it to do, I don't think I gave myself the space to say
mm.
it's okay. So
Yeah.
that's the biggest change for me.
Wow. I think that's such a great lesson to not expect our past selves to perform to the idea and the concept that we have with our present selves, right? Like 3 days ago you didn't think of the line break, but you did now. Like, it's kind of like at that point you're like, "Well, I wish I would have, but we didn't, so we must accept it," you know? Um, I like that you said a poem is never finished. I read a quote the other day that said, "A done poem is a dead poem."
Oh,
That's interesting. Like, if a poem is truly done, it's probably dead.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know, what do you think about that?
It makes me feel so good because I mean it just reinforces that I don't have to be hard on myself if I always want to like rework a poem, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's also a testament to the fact that we're always growing.
Mm.
I mean your poem, like sure, sometimes a poem's like perfect and done, but like more often than not, you probably can find something that you want to like change because you've learned something, or
Yeah,
you now have seen something. So it's and yeah, an undone poem is definitely a sign of being alive because you're still learning and you're still growing.
yeah, exactly, and I think it speaks to the fact that I believe poems are living things. I think they're, like, things that come to us and we have to catch them, and then we have to channel them through us and onto the page. I think that's how they become born to us, essentially, and so, yeah, when a poem is no longer living, I think maybe a poem that is not being paid attention to is a dead poem, like a poem that has been lost somewhere. And sometimes I think they need to stay away for a while and hibernate. I will find poems sometimes from years ago, and I'm like, "Oh, I haven't read that one in so long." And then I pick it up again and I see like 5 things that I wanna change, and it just becomes alive again. And it's kind of like, there's this type of fish that if you put it in the freezer and you freeze it for, like, years, and then you thaw it, it will revive. It'll stay alive. Like, I've heard this. I don't know if it's a myth. Actually, my dad told me this story growing up, so maybe my dad was a liar. Sorry, dad. But, I think sometimes poems are like that fish. They stay away frozen for a while, but if you have the courage to thaw them out, then they revive and they become another living thing. And I've heard poets publishing poems that have been like 20 that they wrote 20 years ago, and they refound the poem and then somehow it got published. And the idea of that just kind of scares me, and also is so fascinating that there's these poems that are just waiting to make their mark on the earth, and we just have to find them.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I think time can really change things. And you could also like take a poem and cut it up into three different poems. But
Mhm.
maybe you could only do that because it's 5 years later and you've realized something or learned something. So it could become three poems instead of just one.
Mhm. The possibilities are endless, and I think that's one of the most exciting parts of poetry is there's so many different poems you can write, there's so many different ways you can write a poem, there's so many poetry people you can meet, there's so many poetry events you can go to. Like, all of the I think living in a poetic existence is a existence of possibility. I think is the main thing. It to me, it feels like the possibilities are endless, just to be a poet. And that's, I think, a way of living, and it's an exciting way of living. Um, do you feel I have a question for you, like, about your writing practice. Do you feel like it's something that you do you intentionally make time to write, or is it something that comes to you and then you write? I'm curious if you wanna, like, walk us through your, like, everyday sort of writing routine, or do you write on a weekly basis? Yeah, I'm always, like, nosy. This is just for purely nosy reasons.
No, that's such a good question. I think I try to have a writing practice, and try being the key word. I'm usually someone that gets up really early. So when the house is quiet and there's nobody awake except for the birds, that's when I try and like get something down on paper. So that's usually around 5:30 in the morning till about 7. That's my writing time. That doesn't always work. Uh, some days I'm just sitting and I have no idea what to do. But I try most days to take an hour in the morning out just for myself.
Mm,
Um, and in I I found that I don't like to edit immediately after writing,
mm,
because when something I've written is fresh, I'm too attached to it. And
mhm,
so I'm unlikely to change it or to cut it or to remove a line that I love or remove an alliteration, even if it's on the nose. Um, so I usually try and edit in the afternoons, and I don't edit every day. I pick 2 days of the week to kind of,
mm,
as my editing time, to kind of really sit with things and see how I want to change them. But most of my writing invariably happens in the moment. You're like in a supermarket and like buying an avocado, and you have a thought about life, and you just have to pull out your notes app and write it down. Or there have been times where I've been in the middle of an argument with my husband, and I'm like, 1 second, because like I've just had this insight into marriage that must make it on the page, right? And I mean, like, hats off to his patience, because he's like, yeah, okay, go ahead. So a lot of it happens in the moment.
mm,
I'm also someone that really writes when I travel. So I try to travel at least once every 6 weeks, because being away from home and kind of being out in nature really helps me write. The rest of my day kind of, I still work in finance with the family. So the rest, like, parts of my day still get taken up by numbers.
mm.
But yeah, I try to get an hour in every day if I can. And I thought I wouldn't be good with a regular writing practice, but I think that's where again Gather really changed that for me, because showing up once a week at a designated hour, and I found that, oh wait, I was actually able to get things on the page, so I
Mm.
don't just have to wait for the moment. really changed that for me.
I'm so glad. I always surprise myself too, to be honest, and I remember when I started Gather, I thought to myself, like, "I only wanna do this if it's something that I would wanna do," you know? And I write with everyone every Sunday too, and it's always surprising to me, or every Sunday and Monday now. We used to just be Sunday morning gathers.
Mm.
That was the original, Gather, but now we have Monday nights too. But,
Yeah.
I surprise myself with I don't maybe that sounds selfish, but I surprise myself with my own prompts. And I'm like, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that was gonna come out today." You never really know. I think there's something to be said, something whimsical about the idea of waiting for inspiration to strike you. Um, but there's something I think that speaks to a poet's dedication to write regardless of inspiration or not, that I think is very, um, admirable when and I think sometimes too, it's like inspiration needs to sometimes be shoved on its butt a little bit and just like, come on now, like giddy up. Because I think sometimes it can be stubborn. So if we sit down, even if we're not really feeling like it, and we just try, and maybe don't try too hard, but just try, and you might surprise yourself, I think, with what can come if you just push yourself just a little bit. I think if you try for 10, 15 minutes and it's really not coming, then of course, maybe it's just not the right time. But, just the consistency of writing often, I think it and I know that to be true for me because I know that when I'm out of rhythm and routine, then I just write less. Like, it's just a matter of fact that I write less, so that must mean that if I have a consistent writing practice, then I'm giving more opportunity for inspiration to meet me halfway, and it's like creating more opportunities to feel inspired, which I think is maybe the key as writers. Definitely for fiction writers. I think poets sometimes get off the hook with not having a regular writing routine because um what we write is so we don't need to write like a 200-page book or 300-page book. It's in smaller bite-sized chunks, but, it's really helped me. I write in the mornings too, you know that, Sue. We're both morning writers. I'm not quite as early as you. I'm like a 6:30, 7 a.m. in the morning. 5:30 is quite early for me. Are you, do you go to bed early then too, or are you a night owl?
Yeah. Yeah, no, no. I go to bed like too early. I go to bed at 9:30 p.m. and I have no life because of that.
I'm the
But
same way. Gotta
yeah,
go to bed early. Go ahead, Sue, sorry.
no, no. I was gonna say to what you were saying, right? That sometimes you may not be inspired, but I also really believe that no writing goes to waste. So even if you're not feeling inspired and you spend 15-20 minutes journaling something or writing something, I think like it will come back. There are
Mm,
so many times that I've just and somewhere it's also exercise, like for your like writing muscles,
mm,
just to write for 20 minutes. And it can go nowhere. That's
mhm.
kind of okay also. Like not everything that you write has to be for a purpose, or has to make it out on Instagram or make it out into a magazine or into a future book. But for me, I found that if I don't practice uh, my writing frequently enough, I kind of forget.
Mhm,
I get rusty. It's not so easy. But the more I practice, like I'm able to identify my line breaks faster.
mhm.
I'm able to, kind of figure out, okay, do I want to rhyme? Do I not want to rhyme? Do I want to do a subtle rhyme? What are the metaphors I want to use?
Yeah,
Sometimes it's just that. Sometimes it's just about just practice it. Take a poem that you've written and rewrite it,
yeah,
yeah, see if it can become something else altogether, right? Or
totally.
just play with like the shape of a poem. Like you take a poem that you already have and see, do you want to change its container? But
Mhm.
it's not going to go anywhere. But it's sometimes just the practice of it that kind of keeps you fit, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
like you're right, it's like exercising those muscles. One of my favorite things I do when I'm feeling sort of stuck or not very inspired is I write a list of all of the words that I wanna use in future poems, and I just find really fun, cool, interesting poems on the or interesting words on the internet, just Googling, like, top 100 coolest words or something, or just even going, like on an article and finding cool words, and then I just keep a word bank, a list of words I wanna use,
Mm.
and then, next time I'm writing, maybe that list has sparked something. Sometimes nothing happens, but I think you're right, it's just the practice of it, and as a writer, one must realize that that is as productive as, I'm using air quotes for anyone that's not watching, um, that is as productive as writing a wonderful poem, just like, when you are training for a marathon, every run counts, and it's not just the final marathon when you cross the finish line. It's all of the
Yeah,
reps that you put in ahead of time, you know, super,
yeah,
super
yeah,
important.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I kinda wanna talk more about, your husband. And I'm laughing because I don't wanna actually talk about your husband, but, um, I'm curious. I have a fiancé, and I will have a husband very soon, and I'm curious to hear how you sort of navigate, like, writing poems about people that you love, people that have hurt you, and yeah, maybe I'll just like to not make it sound like I'm just being too nosy. I feel like one of the greatest gifts in life that I ever got was a fiance that doesn't write. Corey is like not a writer at all, but he's very enthusiastic about my poems, and I think that's really wonderful because if he was a great writer, I would just be jealous all the time. So I'm curious, like, how your relationship with your husband, has shifted and evolved and changed with your writing.
Yeah, I think I got really lucky. Like I have a really, really supportive partner in that sense. So I've known him since I was 13, so that
Oh.
helps. Like he's literally seen my writing evolve since I was 19. Um, uh, but he's really been the person that kind of gave me the guts, and I'm saying guts, to put my work on the internet.
Mm,
Because he's always read it, but it just kind of never went anywhere else.
mhm,
So I got really lucky with that in terms of him saying that no, it doesn't matter what you're writing. Today, if you want to write a poem about how difficult marriage is, and it is, and any relationship is difficult. Everything needs work. But if you want to write a poem about how difficult a marriage is, go ahead. If you want to write a Substack essay about it, go ahead. And I still kind of like, if I'm writing something really personal, I still kind of go to him and show it to him and say, "Look, are you okay with this being on the internet?" And
mhm,
he's always just turned around and said, "Yeah, like, are you
mhm.
posting it now or what?" Um,
Aw,
yeah, so that's with him. But I think also culturally, it is very different. Families tend to have a lot of say on in what you do with your life and what you kind of say and put out there in the world. So that was like a little bit of a hesitation from my side in terms of saying, can I really talk so freely about my body, or can I really talk so freely about my marriage, or can I talk so freely about my life? And there are still like a lot of things that I write about that make it to the Gather portal because that's a safe space, but don't necessarily make it out onto the internet because it's not something I want the people in my life reading.
mhm,
So there is always that. Not everything that I write does end up being consumed by everybody.
mm,
It's a really it's a delicate dance to kind of decide what you're putting out there, because somewhere you also don't want to hurt anybody.
mhm,
And if it's a relationship where the person understands that you will kind of mine your life sometimes and mine the experiences that happen to sort of put something out there and make art with it, that's great. But if the person doesn't understand that, then for me it's a choice. Do I really want to hurt this person?
mm,
Maybe not. So it kind of doesn't go out there. And I think one of the important things is that poetry is not always entirely the truth. It's
mhm,
not like I'm sitting and writing an autobiography with a poem. It could be something that's happened in my day that's influenced the start of a poem, but the
mhm,
five other things that I write in it need not be true. So
mhm,
does the person understand that?
mhm,
That like you will use a poetic license. uh, so that's something that I tend to be a bit more careful about, where
mm,
when it comes to my husband, I don't hesitate, and when it comes to like my own body, I don't hesitate, because that's mine. But a lot of other relationships in my life, even if I'm writing about, I don't necessarily share it.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel the same way. I think it's like those boundaries between that person, maybe even in their privacy. Um, and I think there's ways to for those poems to find resting places and homes and places where they feel good, like perhaps places like the Gather portal that are like it's a private shared space that the public doesn't have access to. Or I've published like one of my more tender poems was published in a lit mag, and I just that's where it's going to live. That's where it's going to stay because unfortunately most people don't read lit mags. So I'm sure the person will never read it. But I think like there's you're right. It's like a fine balance between does this person understand that poets are not that poetry is not memoir and poetry is not necessarily always the entire factual truth. And I think we're lucky enough to have partners that understand that and understand like Corey always says, like, I understand that your desire to write good poetry like supersedes that. It's overarching the fact that I might be writing something that is maybe not 100% positive about someone. And also, oftentimes I'm writing a poem and maybe someone else in my life will reach out and say like, "Oh, is that about Corey?" And it's not even Corey that thinks that. It's just maybe like someone else. So it's like managing those relationships and those expectations. And I think it gets easier too the more poetry people read of yours, I think the more they realize that yeah, you're using your poetic license, and that's a wonderful and a beautiful thing. And I think that's freedom too in the poetry space to kind of write about things through the lines instead of directly like perhaps as they appear. Um,
Yeah. And I think also, like, if you really want to write something, you really want to put it out in the world, and you don't want to hurt someone, use a pen name.
mm,
So that person's never gonna know it was you. If you really feel like it needs to be out there, and
mhm.
that's one route to go down.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good advice. Or maybe a pen name or even just like a private page on Instagram or something like that will retain your anonymity. I don't know how to say that. And will retain the fact that you're anonymous. I'm embarrassing myself today, Sue.
No, not at
Uh,
all. Um,
I've I've never used a pen name. Have you ever used a pen name?
no, but like I wrote a smut poem, and I really think I should use a pen name for that. So I'm considering it.
Yeah. I wonder if, like, it gets murky if you do some poetry under your real name and then some poetry under a pen name, but I suppose you have the option to choose which poems you publish, then you can kind of decide, right? Like, yeah. That sounds kind of fun
Yeah,
actually now that I think about it.
yeah,
It's like an alter ego for yourself.
yeah. Like, we'll create like a proper multiverse here with superheroes and alternate identities, but just in the poetry world.
Yeah, exactly. See? The poetry world is full of possibilities. Uh, it has been so lovely chatting with you, Sue. When this episode goes live, for folks that are listening on Friday, we will be publishing Sue's poem. So stay tuned for that. I know you have to wait. This episode will go live on Monday. But stay tuned. It's definitely one that's worth waiting for. It was written in Gather, and it was a beloved Gather poem. So many folks really loved it. I don't want to say anything more. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a good one. So definitely make sure you check out Sue's poetry on Friday. Sue, is there anything that you would like to offer listeners as your like last little nugget of wisdom when it comes to poetry in the space, or just like whatever? It doesn't have to be wisdom. It could be like humor. I don't know.
That's too much pressure to be funny on point. Is too much pressure. Yeah, I think the only thing I want to say is just like stop scrolling and stay with something.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah,
amazing. I'm gonna get that tattooed tonight. No, I think it's really good advice though, too, and especially in a day and age when scrolling is so readily available at your fingertips any second, to make the decision to not do it is often much harder than to make the decision to do it. Um, but if you think about if we're talking competition, not that you should be in competition with other poets, but if you are the 1% that does not scroll and the 1% that does pay attention, then perhaps your poetry will strike a deeper chord and perhaps it will reach more people and and you might reach deeper parts of yourself too, I think,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
which is so
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing all of this with us, Sue. You're so wise and I think we need um like a title, an epic title for like Sue's life wisdom for this episode.
I'll never live it down with the family if you do that.
Too funny. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
If folks are looking to connect with you online, where's the best place they can reach you and like read more of your work and just follow you along?
so I'm on Instagram at Words by Sue, and I that's where I share my poetry and just random thoughts that I'm having. And I'm also on Substack with my full name, which is Sukriti Patny, and I share some personal essays along with poetry there.
Amazing. Your Substack is so wonderful. I remember when I first discovered it, I was like, wow, this is I think Substack in many ways, I don't love it, but the one thing that I do love is that you get love letters in your inbox from your favorite poet friends. And that's what it really feels like is like beautiful love letters on the inbox. So for anyone listening, make sure you check out Sukriti's Substack and her Instagram as well. I'll have both of them linked in the caption of this video or this podcast. But it was really lovely having you, Sue. I hope we get to do this again sometime. And thanks to everyone listening. We'll be back next week with another episode. Have a great night, everyone listening. And thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you so much. It was really an honor to be here today.